Hello, Cinnabar Moths, or any kind of moth you'd like to be. Welcome to the Writer's Triangle, Cinnabar Moths podcast about all things publishing and books. Today we are here with Tom Howard, author of The Path of Revenge. The Path of Revenge is our August release. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. At last, it's actually sunny in the UK, so it's nice. I don't think
Oh,
we haven't really had a summer yet, so it's been one of the wettest years I think we've ever known. So it's actually sunny and warm, so going to actually enjoy the sunshine at some point today.
that's lovely. It's nice to know that you're getting a break from the legendary rain and clouds over there.
Oh yeah, the UK rain is it's famous, isn't it? Um, Oh dearie me, I don't think we could handle much more rain. We're all of us are just fed up. We just want to get a suntan now. So
Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to have at least a couple of days be able to relax in the sun before you go back into the rainy times.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, I mean 2 days of sunshine in Britain is like a long summer. So
So, how are you feeling about the release of The Path of Revenge? Are you excited?
yeah, really excited. It's it's nice to see like the continuation of what I've been doing over the past 3 years or whatever it is, and seeing like book two come out is really quite humbling in some ways, because it's like part of a bigger picture now. Like book one, The Path of Chaos, was that was like a really proud moment, and now we've got I've got the second book, so it's like two together, and it's like forming this bigger picture, this tapestry of it, and it's wonderful. So I'm really excited for people to kind of read what's kind of continuing in the characters' lives. Really, it's exciting.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I'm personally also very excited with the continuation of the story because with The Path of Chaos, the first book, um, it's very interesting, and the characters themselves have such vibrant personalities. They really stood out to me. And I want to ask you, what are you most looking forward to with the release? And are you going to do anything special to celebrate the release of the second book?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm going to plan to do like a little book launch with it, because now there's two books. Like I feel like I've got two books to share with with people. So I'm going to do like a little book launch of The Path of Revenge, and then give people the opportunity, if they haven't bought it or read it yet, to buy the first one as well. And hopefully garner lots of interest on that. And just because I'm just so proud of the fact that I've got two books published now, with thanks to you guys, that I'm going to just really celebrate that with friends and family. So I'm probably on the day of the release, I'm going to just spend some time with my wife Gemma, and our little girl Autumn, and we'll go for some drinks and celebrate, and just kind of enjoy that moment of seeing it in print, and the fact that people anywhere can read it, which is quite special.
That sounds like a wonderful plan with, the combination of some private, some personal time, and then also that more public book launch idea, right? It kind of
Yeah,
gives you both sides of the picture there.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm not, I mean, it's always a big risk if you try and do any launches or signings or anything, that for anyone to even come along, because that's the risk of being an author, isn't it? But I'm just I'm just going to be really enjoying the fact that it's there in print. I'm just like, just hold it. I don't think that ever changes. Like last year when The Path of Chaos came out, and I held that book for the first time, and it was just really special to have that, your words in print, for to read and for anyone to read. And then having Path of Revenge coming out, and being able to do the same thing, I don't think that kind of that special feeling doesn't really change. It's just as special the second time round as it was the first. So that alone is lovely. So just to have that, for me, is an achievement, and that's what I'm going to really celebrate.
Hmm. And speaking on that a bit more with it's you've held the first book, you're going to be holding the second book, right? You have that experience with repeating it and with continuing a series in particular. How does it feel to continue on the story of the Path of Chaos? And did you plan for it to develop the way that it has?
Yeah, the that's the thing, is the way the story's advanced and it's growing and the world that I've created is growing. Um, it kind of makes you realize that there's kind of like it's limitless, and that's the beauty of imagination, I guess. It is limitless, and like the world I've created, I'm really excited about, because it's a big world. I didn't realize the world would be as big as it already is within the two books, and actually the inspiration it's given me for the third book, and also just for, there's so many different kind of spin-offs that could come out of it that I really am excited about. And if I've got the time and the energy, that I could really explore doing. So that side of it is 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 exciting, because you suddenly realize how far you can take things and how big a world you can create if you're willing and daring to do it. And some of it is just having the confidence and the kind of courage to keep expanding this world, because you suddenly go, well, it's my world, I've created it, I can almost do anything I want with it. And that's that's inspiring. But no, the Path of Revenge, the way it's gone is definitely very different to how I first thought it would go when I began writing it. And actually, even before that, when I started planning it, I just finished the Path of Chaos, but I was thinking about how to then move into book two, how it's actually happened and how it's evolved and how it's come to fruition is actually really different, um, to what I thought it would be. I mean, a lot of the characters, how their story's gone, I wasn't surprised by, but some of the action, some of the events that have happened almost surprised me, because I was like, I didn't expect it. I didn't think I'd go that way with it, but it was just this natural progression. It had to, like I almost didn't have a choice.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. With having, when I wrote my own book, I also kind of experienced that what you're talking about with the world kind of growing
Mm.
even larger than you necessarily had thought you'd grow a world, right? And then you're like, oh wow, I've thought up all of these ideas that make up everything around this, and I thought I was just gonna write this small little chunk here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's just that kind of where you're kind of creating a character and then the world around them, and then you suddenly go, hang on a sec. And because my works, because it is alternate history, it's action adventure, but it's like an alternate history of if Romans still ruled the world today, and then suddenly going, well, if my character's doing that and they're in this world, and this world is different to the one we know, but because the timeline of history is slightly different, then that means that would potentially be going on instead. And suddenly you realize, like, it's that whole butterfly effect thing, that if that changes, then the ripple effect on the rest of history changes, and therefore the world will look even more different to what we understand it is now. So it's that exciting part of how one action can massively impact so many other actions around the world, and that's what the exciting thing about writing an alternate history is, that you see how different things can be, or even slight differences over generations can make massive differences. It's really fun when exploring that side of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's also been fun for me as a reader to see kind of some of the alterations that are you're talking about that just sort of naturally happen with, well, we've changed the course of history. What does that mean for the course of the present as far as the book
Mhm.
is concerned, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, and it's quite enjoyable, just like kind of dropping kind of famous historical names into the story, but then because of the way the world has changed in the books, they're not so famous anymore, or they're not significant like they would, what like we know them to be, and that kind of thing. It's quite fun doing that, or just name
Right.
dropping little bits, and then almost teasing the reader, and so they want to know more about that. It's fun. It's fun.
And so I want to talk with you a little bit more about the characters, right? We've talked a little bit about the world here and that development, but you also mentioned, certain characters and their stories kind of progressing in the way that you imagine. Can you talk a bit about your relationship with the characters in the book?
Yeah, I mean Boatman King, the main protagonist. I've got quite a interesting relationship with him because when I first started writing him and and introducing him and developing him in the Path of Chaos, I realised that I he wasn't he wasn't the hero I'd envisaged him to be. And in the Path of Revenge, I mean, like all, like all of us, we're human. We're not black and white. There's lots of grey areas to us all. But with him, like I read, I was quite fascinated by his complexities and the fact that he is a troubled hero, and there's hypocrisy within him because of the cause that he fights for and the greater good that he believes comes above everything else, and the complexities and the difficulties that creates in his relationships. So yeah, I've had a fun time really kind of going forwards with him. And therefore then how other characters perceive him, and I've enjoyed I've enjoyed that side of it because I love dialogue. I feel is my strongest element to my writing, and so how he engages with people and how the conversations are evolving between different characters about him, and I've really enjoyed that, and how they've struggled with him at times. So that's been really fun doing that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that what you touched on with Boatman not being the hero you thought you originally imagined him to be, I do feel kind of a greater development understanding how flawed yet doing his best Boatman is, you know, and that he is in many ways a an imperfect person,
Yeah.
and he's grounded in that humanity through the story in ways that I wouldn't have even necessarily imagined would be the development from reading the first book going into the second, but it all makes sense to me when I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, that reading it makes sense, but it's not what I would have expected.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good. I like that. I like, but I guess, I mean, it can be easy. I mean, it can be easy to write a character, and they're kind of like, I don't know, they're kind of immovable, and there's no kind of sense of kind of frailty or adjustments in their worldview or how they engage with people. So I don't know. I'm
Right.
thinking about I don't know, like say you got like this move, like Jack Reach is a prime example as a protagonist. It's so set in stone about who he is and what he stands for and what he does that never changes book to book. Whereas I found with Boatman, because of the complexity of what he was fighting for, he was going to have there was going to be things that was going to cause him to massively change in in how he was behaving, and also how other people were going to perceive him. So
Yeah, I definitely agree that the development has been very interesting to see the interplay between the different characters. And like you mentioned, the dialogue I found rather enjoyable, but I also want to give you some recognition on some of the things that aren't necessarily strictly the words being said, where you do inject a lot of personality and, the mannerisms and the way that even the conversations begin or how they shift and adjust over time as the characters interact has been really fascinating for me to read and to kind of experience as, a fellow writer, seeing some of the techniques that you use. It's been really fascinating, the development outside of the words, where you use these interactions between characters so well.
oh, thank you. Yeah, no, that's lovely. Thank you. I always yeah, when I'm especially with when I'm well actually when I'm just writing, one thing I try and write it visually. So I'm always thinking about how would it look if it was on screen. I'm always thinking about it in that way. But with the way people interact with the way characters interact with each other and speak with each other. I'm always thinking about, I'm imagining if I was them and I was having a conversation and thinking about how naturally that would happen, or how it would just evolve in, as characters are engaging and interacting with each other. How if that was actually real, how would that happen if I was there doing it? Because it's hard. Dialogue can be hard because you can end up doing a lot of explaining when you don't need to. That whole show don't tell kind of element
Right.
of writing, which is obviously really important. But I think I'm always thinking about if I was actually having that conversation, how would it work? How would the engagement happen? In regards to mannerisms or like reactions and the micro expressions and things like that. I'm always thinking about that and trying to make it as authentic as possible.
Yeah, I think that you do a really great job with it, and I've taken notes in my own writing from it, and some of the ways that you'll, I notice sometimes intentionally leave out details because certain characters aren't as observant as other ones, and other ones will pick up on those things, and so you detail them, and kind of things like that where you're providing more depth to the characters themselves without actively saying it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's really hard because sometimes you just like, especially if you're excited about how something's going to go, you kind of want to spill the beans on it early when you're writing it because you just kind of want the reader to kind of know about it. And then you're like, well, no, that doesn't work. Like you can't do that because you're kind of A, maybe giving the story away too quickly, or B, that's just not how people that's not how people communicate. I do think about how there's so often when you're speaking with someone with a lot of um, kind of preordained knowledge. So you don't have a conversation and think and explain who you are again to say, oh, I wouldn't tell Gemma, my wife, explain who I am and where I'm from, and things like that. There's stuff we know about each other which is unsaid, so you don't need to say it again. So when you're speaking, you come into a conversation with knowledge already. So it's just trying to get that across when characters are engaging with each other, that things will go unsaid that they naturally assume about each other. And like you say, some characters don't pick up on stuff as quickly as others anyway, and that's normal with human life. Some of us, we're not as observant as others, like whether some people are empaths and some people aren't they? So it's trying to, that complexity of how humans communicate with each other and interact with each other. I'm trying as best as I can to get that, across through my characters.
I personally feel like you've done a wonderful job of it. And speaking a little bit more of the characters, the story revolves, primarily around Boatman, but it does involve a rather diverse cast with Maverick and with Faust and some others. And each of them have their own agendas, their struggles, and their goals. Overall, though, what inspired the story for you? Not just in, the first book, The Path of Chaos, but also in this one, The Path of Revenge.
It was that well, it came all from, I mean, the Path of Chaos came from just a small idea, like a seedling of an idea about a multiverse. Like when I was doing my master's in creative writing, and I had an idea about a multiverse where there's like a golden thread running through it, and there was different realities. One was a Roman reality, one was going to be like a Victorian steampunk reality, one was going to be a Western. Um, but the Roman one really captured me the most in its potential, and that's the one I then started to run with and really got inspired to keep going with it. And then, like with the Path of Revenge, my biggest inspiration from it has been the endless possibilities, because I really wanted to write quite like a kind of like a sledgehammer of a villain, of a like someone who really does grab the reader by the throat. And I do think Bjorn Asker is that kind of villain, and that his kind of his journey through this book and as a kind of formidable force was the most inspiring part for me, actually, because I'm a fan of a good villain. Like some of my favorite, I mean, one of my favorite book of all time is Hannibal by Thomas Harris. Hannibal Lecter's like probably my favorite literary character because he's such a complex and fascinating and kind of magnetic villain. And so I kind of my inspiration was, could I write a villain? I mean, I couldn't. Could I write a great villain? You know, and I like to think Bjorn Asker is one.
I definitely think that his introduction, at the very least, left a jarring impression on me.
Yeah, just a bit.
So reading that, I was immediately caught in, and it definitely had that grab you by the throat feeling, right? Of like, wow, this guy is awful, but also I want to know more.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's you want to lure the reader into wanting to know more, you know, because I mean, you know, it's happened with me with some books. Like sometimes a character's been too difficult, and then I've found it hard to keep reading because it's been like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I can keep going with this one. So it's having a character that, like, ask if he is a villain, that he's like, oh, you know, that people are like, oh my word, this person is, like you say, awful, but I want to find out what else he does, you know, and how other people engage with him. So it's a tricky one because I don't want to put people off. I don't want to put readers off. I want them to really get drawn in and know more and want to find out more about him, and also how like Boatman and all the others engage with him, you know.
Yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense. Now I want to touch a little bit more on that when you talk about, the writing a powerful villain and sort of representing that someone who's quite, evil in many ways and is just a bad person,
Yeah.
and the cruelties involved in that, right? Because he's not the only character in the book who does brutal things, right?
Mm.
It's a rather heavy story in that regard, with some of the brutality, the cruelty, and everything. Do you
Mm.
find it challenging to kind of touch on these topics and to strike a balance between expressing the kind of the natural, the existing brutality and the cruelty without it necessarily becoming grotesque?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, that's partly why I always try and inject, like, especially with Maverick and Tobias, is that they're the way they interact with each other, injecting that humor into the
Mm.
story, because yeah, like you say, it can, yeah, it's that gratuitous violence. I didn't want to go where you're just doing it for the sake of it, just to shock. I don't ever want to do the just doing that to shock the reader. You know, it's not that's not the point. There's a deeper element to it that you know the brutality in it is actually logical within the world that it's in, you know. So I mean, because I think we kind of, well, if you look at humanity's been pretty brutal for its entire existence, I think. Um so it's kind of not shying away from the fact that, like the Romans, they were obviously very brutal, and but even, you know, even now when we look at the world we live in, there's a lot of brutality that goes on. So I think it's kind of not shying away from the fact that unfortunately humans have this tendency to be brutal. So it's kind of, but again, it's not over, trying not to overbear the reader, because, and that's why I have the humor side of it, because otherwise it's just so dark, and you want a little bit of hope, you know, you want to see that light flickering through at times, and it can be hard to see it. So it's trying to give the reader that excitement from the action, and also where you kind of maybe step back a bit and go, whoa, that was pretty extreme, but then something lightens the mood, or something gives a little bit of hope through it, you know. So and this book being the Path of Revenge, being book two, you know, with a second book leading on to another one, that sometimes can be the one with the least hope in, because it's kind of juxtaposed, there's that juxtaposition between the beginning where there's this naive hope, and then hopefully at the end where there is the hope, and in the middle that can be the darkest bit sometimes. So, but I didn't want to go so dark that people kind of, it exhausted the reader. And so it's a tricky balance to strike.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It can be challenging. I personally don't think that I necessarily have the chops to do it myself, but I think that you do a wonderful job of doing it, where you have this kind of this honest lens of these types of people and the types of actions that people take when can take, I guess, not necessarily will, but can take when they're put in these positions, right? Because
Yeah.
not all of the brutality is necessarily from, just someone in a position of power bullying somebody beneath them, but also
Mm.
cases where brutality is a necessary thing for someone pushing through to their goals.
Yeah.
And in particular with this story, I think that the representation of, evil men and kind of cruel people and the brutality, the struggle against them, the brutality that's involved in what is essentially a war, right? And
Yeah.
the individual lives that interplay throughout the series and the individual lives that are part of that battle is a mixture of quite a few difficult elements that I think that you do a good job of weaving together in a way that doesn't just leave the reader tired from how much heavy stuff is going on the whole time, right?
Oh,
I do
yeah.
think that you do inject a good balance of there is lightness and there's also even not even necessarily lightness, just a bit of a pause between the heaviest parts where
Yeah.
things are still happening and the story is still progressing, but you're not constantly reminded of how bad things are, right?
Yeah, because that's life, isn't it? Like, we we well, for me personally, the past year or so has been a tricky one, a difficult one emotionally, and but it's not a constant kind of heaviness that goes on. Like, there are those moments of reflection or just taking a breath in real life where you just step back and go, kind of breathe out. And so for a reader, they need that too, because otherwise, like you say, it's exhausting, and you end up thinking, that book's knackered me out. you don't you kind of don't want that. I want people to be, engaged, and for it to be a page turner, but I don't want the reader to just kind of feel like that's exhausted them and they need to take a break from reading, or from, from my works. Say, I want them to think, oh, I want the next one. I want that to be the reaction at the end of it, not, oh, I'm tired. I think I'll avoid that author for a little while, because I've done that. I've read some really heavy stuff and then gone, and then I've seen maybe they've released something else and I've been like, I don't know if I've got the mental kind of bandwidth right now to read that. And I don't want the reader to feel like that with my stuff. So it's really, hopefully that I've achieved that, but but it's such a subjective thing anyway, isn't it, with reading, that you never quite
Yeah.
know.
I personally feel like you've done a great job with it in terms of providing not only when you uh, providing those breaks and kind of that lightness to counterbalance it, but also in the way that you're descriptive without being overly detailed in describing some of the things, right?
Hmm.
Uh, like we talk about Bjorn as for an example, his introduction could have been a lot darker, even though it was dark.
Yeah, yeah.
In the way that you represented it still provided a kind of like, wow, that was intense, rather than, whew, that was a lot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the thing, is like trying to, I want people's imaginations to do a lot of the work, so I don't want to go too
Mm,
descriptive, because then you're kind of taking away the reader's kind of imagination, because we all know that if if something gets made into a film, we've all already envisaged how characters look or behave, and all that kind of stuff. We have in our own heads how they look. So I kind of
right.
want that for Bjorn and for Olivia and Boatman and Maverick and Spark, all of them, and Bella and all of them. I want people to have in their minds their own creation of what they look like or behave or move and all that kind of stuff. So teasing them with descriptions of them, but then letting the reader really kind of go to town on imagining the rest, you know.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I've enjoyed the progression with these characters quite a bit. And while there is space for my imagination, I still do get a very strong sense of who these characters are as people within the story,
Yeah, cool.
and that there is that cementing of identity, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And going a little bit more into the story, and with the kind of the messaging, for me at least, every story has its own message. And when reading it through the path of revenge, it's to me has been about kind of the struggle against people and evil people in power, people who abuse their power, while also having another thread of kind of the destruction that goes on that path of revenge, right? And how it isn't necessarily a happy ending,
Mm.
even as we get what we consider to be justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because justice and happiness don't go together, do they, all the time? um, yeah, that's yeah, absolutely. Because it's been like that for some things to happen and for some people to find their sense of justice, it can be quite a dark path, really, and quite a difficult path to get there. And it doesn't necessarily create the sense of shall we say, kind of, it doesn't bookend it as much as as much as what we'd like to believe sometimes. So we can think that in real life, say, we can think that if something happens, that will then bring closure, or that will bring a sense of, of justice. But then sometimes that isn't the case. Sometimes actually how it all plays out, then how we react to that emotionally can actually suddenly be very difficult and different to what we thought it would be. So it's, yeah, yeah, justice can sometimes be a very subjective thing. What we think is justice isn't what other people think is as well. So yeah, there is that complexity and 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 that naivety as well. So I kind of hoping some of that comes across within some of my characters. That naivety about what is justice as well.
Yeah, personally, I did find that to be kind of one of the interesting points that you bring up in the story is about on both sides, both with the antagonist and the protagonist, there's at times a short-sightedness and a naivety to their behaviors. And some of them, they catch themselves and they realize it before they fully go through with it. But with many of the cases that you bring examples of, it's more them looking back on it and going, ah, damn.
Yeah, yeah. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. So yeah, um, yeah, absolutely. I think I really, it's quite, you suddenly realize, like, especially like with writing these books, that the philosophy behind how we respond to situations in regards to our own egos and things like that, you can end up writing a book twice the length when you can go into a deep psychological study of humanity, can't you? And so you've got to be really careful, because at the end of the day, what I'm trying to write is basically an action adventure kind of alternate history page turner. So but it could be. I've seen, like, I've in the editing process, actually cutting stuff out, going, that's a bit, there's too much kind of analysis of the psyche there when it doesn't really fit within this genre, so, and the length of the work. So it's really tricky sometimes, because maybe I'll write a more philosophical kind of story, but that doesn't fit within this one. So it's it's trying to get that balance, isn't it, with the genre you're writing.
For sure. I think that some of that philosophy does like peek through. It's
Yeah,
not overwhelming or overpowering, but I do see it in some of the characters and some of the ponderings that they have. I think the biggest one for me when reading through it was kind of Faust and a lot of his thinking, but I don't want to spoil anything. So uh going into the what you talked about with, writing more than the story in the story, right? With
Mm.
that, it's been, a year since the publication of The Path of Chaos. We're here now at The Path of Revenge. Did you feel a draw to write other stories while writing the second book? Was all your attention on this one? Did you end up getting distracted perhaps by some of the, the philosophy that you're talking about, some of the more philosophical ideas or those trains of thought? How was it for you in terms of, sticking to one story in a sense?
Yeah, it was quite hard actually. I mean, because I have actually started writing a completely different book, but I've only like been sketching out ideas and writing the odd kind of paragraph so it's there for the future. But I did because I had a sudden thought about it was more about like human kind of um relationship, so much more about relationship than anything else, and particularly I think because of some of the characters, like about narcissism and things like that, and I had some interesting ideas about people, about narcissism really, and about people with who are narcissistic and how they engage with the world around them. So because someone like say Bjorn Asker is a narcissist and
Right.
completely like blinkered about his own who he is and how he sees the world. And so I had some ideas about a really interesting kind of family melodrama type thing that involves narcissism. So yeah, so that did inspire me to think of some other stuff to write, which one day when I've got time I will flesh that out. But then I had to go, right, put that aside. That's probably like 2 years down the road or something, and focus on the path of revenge. But that did it those kind of reflections and inspirations did help me write the path of revenge with a bit more kind of authenticity for the characters. So that was a good thing because it just made me think a little bit more about how the characters would behave when thinking about a deeper level, about when looking at the world around us we see in the world around us people who lack empathy and things like that. So yeah, that helped me write the path of revenge with a bit more clarity and for some of the characters, definitely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I do find myself a little bit excited to hear that you're writing something that's a little bit more philosophical because I definitely see the hints of it in the writing of The Path of Revenge, where at times it almost felt like you were cutting yourself short. Just like, wait a minute, this isn't what this book's about.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
which makes sense because it does keep the book moving forward in the way that it's supposed to, right? But
Yeah.
I I saw hints of those and I was like, ooh, for me personally, because I find it interesting, I go, I wish I could have gotten a bit more of that. I know it's not appropriate, but
Yeah, I mean it's kind of it's just that I mean it's a good thing in that I want to keep writing, and there's lots of things that I want to do. Because when you're writing a lot and when you're doing, with like the Path of Chaos has come out and then now the Path of Revenge is about to come out and all the work that goes, as the work that goes into writing a book,
right,
the mental kind of struggle of it and that imposter syndrome as well of like thinking that everything you're writing isn't any good. um, so then to then get inspired to write something else and draw something else further down the line is great because then it goes, well, that passion as a writer's there and want me to keep going and keep doing and keep exploring other avenues and then make what I'm currently working on even better and in line with what's been come before it, because it's that consistency of voice that can be really hard. And I found that, look, the Path of Revenge, I wanted to make sure that my voice was consistent with book one, and that's, try not to overthink that as well, because then you start overthinking and reading back what you're written and going, oh, is that consistent with the voice I had, previously, and just trusting the natural, what is naturally coming out as I'm writing, because I know in my head where the story's going, and I know these characters really well now, so just trusting that as I'm writing, that consistent voice is coming through.
Yeah, speaking of voice, do you feel like your written voice has changed since you started the series? Do you feel like it's evolved or developed in any way, or do you feel like your voice is mostly the same with just some slight adjustments? What are your feelings about your written voice and the experience of your writing on it?
It's definitely evolved. Thing is, the more you write, the better you get. Like with anything, it's like, but well, saying the more you write, the better you get. It's having that self-awareness of what you're writing, and then reading back and seeing seeing where maybe there's the inadequacies, and then working on those, because we all have certain strengths and weaknesses as a writer. And I think it's, for me, I've seen my voice has evolved in the sense that just trusting in where I'm really strong and letting that come through, and that, because that's my, like I say, my strength, I really believe, is my ability to write dialogue, and then so letting the dialogue really come through in the way it should, that it doesn't overburden the reader, because I don't want to like have everything as dialogue, because otherwise I might as well just write a screenplay. But having that, because I think my voice is the strongest and the most consistent is through dialogue, because it's then letting the characters come through in their own little, with their own little nuances and mannerisms and things. And yeah, I think that's grown a lot stronger as the books have been coming along. From the page one of the Path of Chaos to the end page of the Path of Revenge, looking back, and obviously because as I'm writing, I'm going through those books to make sure I've got certain information right, and I'm not, I've got no plot holes and things like that. But seeing, as I'm reading through, I'm seeing, going, yeah, I've got the confidence of writing those characters. And I think a lot of it is confidence, is as you're writing, just being confident in your ability and then letting that come through. So I've seen that evolve, because I think the Path of Revenge is a more confident book than Path of Chaos in that sense, in what I've been writing.
That's wonderful to hear that you're feeling more confident as a writer. And I personally am a fan of your work and your writing. So hearing that you're becoming more confident in your writing makes me happy, because I feel like you're a phenomenal writer, right? I'm a big fan of your work and your writing, and so hearing that you're giving yourself permission to fully express yourself in that way, right? Which is kind of what confidence is in some ways, is great to hear as a fan of your work.
Thank you. It's nice to have a fan. Yeah. Because that's the other thing, isn't it? And it's because it's being confident in what you're doing, even if you're not feeling particularly confident in how it's going to sell. So there's two different things: the selling side of things and the molding of your art are two different things, aren't they? So like, I'm confident in my skills as a writer, and I hope that then translates into lots of people reading it. That's that's a marathon, not a sprint, as an author, isn't it? Like, it can take a long time for people to engage with your work, and I hope that when they do, and they see that confidence come through, that makes them talk about it, and and the word of mouth gets around, and that's the tricky part.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's kind of a separation between writing work that we are confident is representative of ourselves, and then whether that ties into it's selling or not is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah,
Right?
it really is, isn't it? Yeah,
Especially with the research that we've done into it, Iris and Moth, we know for a fact that just writing a good book is not a guarantee for things to sell. There are plenty of amazing writers and authors who go unknown despite having written phenomenal works just
yeah,
because they didn't get the traction for one reason or another, right?
absolutely. Yeah, and it's sometimes there's no rhyme or reason, is there? Like you can,
Right.
yeah, and then you see mediocrity, sell by the millions, don't you? So who knows? You just don't know. I mean, it just takes one. It can just take one little spark. I mean, my wife is an avid reader. Like she reads. I think she's read already. We're in July. She's read. I think she's read something like 80 books this year already.
Oh wow.
she's, yeah, she honestly, she'd already read 50 books I think by April or something. I don't know, it's mad. Um,
That's impressive.
yeah, she reads a lot, but she says one of her favorite books is by an indie author, and it was written back in something like 2015. And then last year it became like a phenomenon because someone on TikTok um, reviewed it and loved it, and then it just, then suddenly sales just exploded, and that for that writer, they just had that spark of a moment where someone caught their work and fell in love with it, and then wanted to tell the world about it, and the world listened, So
Right.
um, it's yeah, it's but then you can find someone else who and you read, and as with all art, and it's all subjective. What I would think isn't very good, other people would say they love, but you know some stuff objectively, which you think that's not very good writing, sells by the millions, and so you just don't know, do you? But when you've got someone who's an amazing talent, and you hear of so many artists and musicians and writers who who produce incredible works, and then they don't even get recognized until after they've died. Then suddenly someone picks up on it and go, that was incredible, and it's like, why did no one pick up on that when they were alive and they can know about it? So it's so hard, isn't it, to know how. I don't know. It's luck. Is it luck, or is it just the fate of the gods, as my characters would think?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that it can be tricky to figure out, and then sometimes when you think you've got it, it's like, oh nope, that wasn't it. It just happened to be that a couple of times, and it was not actually a real pattern. You know,
Yeah,
I think the world works in that way sometimes too, where we think I think we as people are kind of in many ways habituated to finding patterns and to finding flow to things, even
yeah,
if they don't necessarily exist, and we can kind of trick ourselves in that way,
yeah,
even outside of talking about the specific topic. I'm going a little bit broad here, but
yeah,
um, people I think kind of cling to patterns as a way to make sense of things in some ways, when there's not always such a clear cut rhyme or reason.
absolutely, absolutely.
So we have now with the Path of Revenge. It's coming out this upcoming Tuesday. We have the publication, right? It's basically done as far as what needs to really be done with it. You mentioned you're going to be doing the book launch with the signing and everything, but what's next for you? Do you plan to write? You mentioned writing more in the series, but also some other books. Are you thinking about exploring some other genres in particular? What's on your mind? What's next for you?
Well, I mean, carrying on the Path of Chaos series, definitely getting. I've got a plan and a story, how this story arc within this series will end. So carrying on with that, and the excitement of taking this story to. I would conclusion probably isn't the right word, because as with life, nothing ever truly ends. It just a chapter finishes, doesn't it? So we're bringing this arc into a moment where people kind of see some kind of closure for certain characters, and then I have got an idea. Well, I've got quite a lot of ideas, but I've got an idea for a really interesting family melodrama, which so will be completely different genre. So, and just writing something about relationship, about family relationship, and the complexity of that, especially around, in my mind, is like around this kind of narcissistic kind of parenthood that oversees a family, and how the various children kind of react and grow up within that, and then how they develop over the years, and in various ways of like that kind of narcissistic frameworks. I've got that in my mind, which I think could be quite an interesting piece that will, I think will a lot of people will resonate with, actually. And then I'm trying to work out. I'm still working on writing a screenplay pilot for The Path of Chaos, because I'd like to try and pitch it. I've been trying to pitch it to various kind of production companies and stuff to turn it into maybe a Netflix series, or a streaming series even. So I've got some ideas to write a pilot episode of The Path of Chaos, turning that into like maybe a 6-7 episode miniseries. So yeah, that's, I've done some work on it, some very loose work on it, but I definitely in the next year try and put a screenplay together as well for The Path of Chaos, and see if I can get it out there, see if anyone's interested.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear about. It sounds like you got quite a few things coming up next for fans of yours to look forward to, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Just to wrap things up here a little bit, do you have any advice for authors who might be planning to write a story that spans multiple novels now that you've experienced continuing a series?
Yeah, consistency. So really, really know your characters, and keep them like. Humans are not necessarily consistent. We, over the years we evolve, and things happen to us which changes who we are, and but there's always a core underlining of who we are as people that I don't, that stays with you. And I think having that consistency with your characters, so knowing your characters, and then if you're going to write them over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books, whatever it is, having them naturally evolve, because we all evolve, and we all evolve to the environments and the things that happen around us, but having a consistency of voice with those characters, so that character. And so if you pick up book 3 and you read that character, that character very well, and you recognize that character as you would in book 1. So I think if you are writing multiple books, read your work and get to know your characters really well, so when you come to write them in the future, they come out in a consistent way. So the voice is the same for them, so that's one bit of advice. And perseverance, really. It's because it's hard being an author. It's hard because you want people to read your work, and if you don't feel like people are interested, it can become quite disheartening, and then you can lose faith in writing something else. So it's persevering with it, and trusting in your abilities, and that maybe, just maybe, people will pick it up and really, really love it, and then tell their friends or their family about it. And at the end of the day, if one person reads your work and loves it, that's a blessing. So just kind of persevering with your craft and not giving up on it.
I think that's all wonderful advice, and I appreciate you sharing with us. And I appreciate you as well, Tom. Thank you for talking with me today and talking with us and being on the Writer's Triangle.
It's great been talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and thank you to all of our beautiful moths for listening. Be sure to buy The Path of Revenge, coming out this upcoming Tuesday. Tom, can you let us know where we can find you, social media, links of that sort?
Yeah, I'm on lots of things. You can find me on Twitter, Howard Tom, and that that username Howard told me is what I use pretty for all my social media. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, so you can find me on all those things, and regularly sharing not just about my books but my family business as well as an oysterman. So yeah, you can find updates about all that kind of stuff that I'm doing, and hopefully you can let me know that you're reading what I'm doing, and let me know what you think.
Wonderful. And for everybody listening, be sure to visit cinnabarmoth.com, where you can check out the transcripts of the interview, and we'll have the links to all of Tom's social media. Once again, Tom, it's been wonderful talking with you today and having you on. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And to everybody listening, bye-bye.